PR Lab presents the first ever MedTech PR Summit, dedicated to shaping the future of MedTech and biotech communications. As these industries grow at an unprecedented pace, strategic targeted PR is more essential than ever. Gain exclusive insights from the leaders shaping the future of MedTech communications. Session number 1, Making MedTech Visible, Strategic PR and Messaging That Works. Session number 2, Navigating the Investor-Media Intersection in Biotech. Session 3, Inside the Journalist's Mind, What the Media Really Want from PR. This summit is brought to you by PR Lab, the leading MedTech and BioTech PR agency. The summit will start shortly. Please stay tuned and prepare to be inspired by our speakers.
And welcome to PR Lab's MedTech PR Summit. I'm Jacqueline from PR Lab. I will be your host today, kicking off the first session for our series to follow. And during the series, we'll be talking more about how to make MedTech communications human, how to achieve the consistency and efficiency we're all after as communication practitioners. So we'll touch on everything from storytelling to compliance through to thought leadership and measuring PR success as we go through our series. And joining me today is the lovely Lindsay. And Lindsay, I'll hand over to you on that note. I think you're more than capable of introducing yourself.
I would love to. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here. I love storytelling and communications, and especially MedTech. So I'm just delighted to be here today. But yeah, so my name is Lindsay Deneen. I am the Director of Marketing and Engagement for Project MedTech. And we are a consulting company that helps MedTech innovators go from ideation all the way through exit or go to market, depending on kind of what their end goal is. And we do that through a lot of different consulting practices, but we also do education, events, media. We have a podcast. It's a whole lot of fun. And so storytelling is actually quite a bit of our jam. It's actually how we got started as a brand. The whole company got started as a podcast that grew into this consulting firm and then became a place where we could do events out of it. In fact, we have one coming up very soon. So it's really exciting to see how all of this is coming together. But my background is in marketing, business development, and business strategy for small businesses. I've done that through a number of different industries over the years, but I say about 5 years ago, I happily stumbled into MedTech. I worked for a CDMO and found my people and my happy place within MedTech. I love being a part of this industry. I love the fact that even though I'm not the engineer who is literally putting things together and figuring out how to go from this ideation to product, I'm not necessarily that person, but what I can do is help you tell others about your invention. I can help spread the word, and just getting to play a small role in that is one of the happiest things of my life. So I also have an industry podcast as well. It's called The Leading Difference, and I'm all about sharing the whole idea of these amazing MedTech leaders are doing excellent work. They are changing lives for a better world. How can we share those stories and make sure that people know that they are there making a difference?
Beautiful. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that, Lindsay. It's really great to see your enthusiasm about the profession. You mentioned storytelling. So kicking off a question on that, I think with MedTech clients, we're often faced with complexities, and we have the opportunity to help really innovative companies communicate their stories in a way that is a little bit more digestible for their target audiences to understand. So do you maybe have a storytelling approach that you like to use in order to to communicate those complexities in a more digestible way.
Yes, and actually, I think what's helpful is thinking about it in terms of one story doesn't fit everyone, which I know is kind of, one size doesn't fit all. It's kind of the same thing here. One story doesn't fit everyone. So depending on who you are speaking to in the moment, whether you're speaking to clinicians or patients or potential investors, every single person is going to have a different end goal in mind. The things that are important to them might not be important to the next category of people, or not as important. So I think one thing to think about is that, well, you can have some aligned messaging, which I firmly believe you should. You can have some aligned messaging that says the same thing, essentially across all different ways of outreach to those different groups. What you also need to think about is clinicians care about one area, patients care about another, investors care about another. So you kind of need to make sure that you're tailoring your storytelling to each individual one, which I know sounds a little bit overwhelming at times, but if you can break it down and think about their pain points. So for example, a patient might have the pain point of the current device, not the one we're innovating on, right? But the current device is very uncomfortable and they feel a lot of pain when this particular technique is used because of the instrument that it's being used from. Well, okay, so their pain point is literally pain, right? So they're going to be interested in the selling point that it is a more comfortable procedure because of this device, this innovative device. Versus the clinician, they might have this idea that actually this is a less expensive tool to use. It is more efficient, it is more affordable, whatever their end goal is. They're going to have that you kind of need to frame that story around. And then the investor, you might say something like, well, this device is helping to cut costs and, procedure time, and it's going to change the way that the patient experiences this procedure. And so that's going to make a huge difference in the industry. So it's kind of a long-winded way of saying that when you tell your story, it's not necessarily just one story. It's a few stories that are aligned to the needs of each individual group. And one of the things that you could always fall back on is, can I explain this to my grandma? Which I know we talk about a lot in marketing, but the idea of being, if my grandma were to ask me, what is it that you do, or what is this invention all about? Can you explain it to them in a way that says, you've just put it into basic terminology that doesn't include acronyms or industry jargon or things like that? Mm-hmm. And I would say, more so than a overarching framework, think about it in the sense that you're talking to humans, clinicians and patients and investors and whatever groups that you're talking to. Even though they have different needs and different selling points, so to speak, they're at the end of the day, we're all humans. We can all relate to the fact that emotion matters, and that connection point between the selling points, the features of your invention, but how does this make me feel? How does this improve patient outcomes? How does this reduce risk? And take it from there.
Nice. So this is almost like we're building a puzzle. We're crafting that narrative to really resonate across the board. And you said, explain it as if you're talking to your grandmother. So do you perhaps have a few common, call them mistakes or pitfalls, that we as communication practitioners should be cautious of when crafting these narratives? For example, running the risk of oversimplifying a message and perhaps changing the meaning or the intention behind it?
Yeah, that's a great point to bring up. And I would say that is exactly something to be aware of. So even though we want to be able to explain it to our grandma, even though we want grandma to understand and not be confused and frustrated because they're not getting it, yes, we don't want to oversimplify it to a point where, again, we're not able to accurately describe what it is that we do or what the product is and things like that. So you're absolutely right in that there is a bit of a fine line between making things accessible and understandable to a wide population while not dumbing it down, so to speak, to the point of we're not accurately capturing the technology that we're doing, that we're innovating on. So I would say that there is, that we can do both, right? So again, speaking about sort of educating our audience, I think a big thing that companies should feel that they don't need to shy away from is that element of education. So let's start with explaining it to her grandma, right? Let's start with maybe a simplified version of just this does X, right? And so therefore we're going to go from this old outcome to this new outcome, right? And maybe it's not extremely technical. Maybe there's not a whole ton of scientific terms or engineering terms or whatever. However, we need lots of different narratives, right? So again, it really goes back to who are you speaking to? A clinician or a scientist or an investor is going to have a really different level of probably understanding and care in terms of we need the science behind it too. So, as you're developing your narratives, you want to make sure that you are backing things. It's not all fluff. And I don't mean fluff in the general sense of fluff, but it's not just that end user sort of narrative, but it's also, as you move backward from that, it's also, hey, here's the science behind this. Here's the data behind this. Here's all of the features that this provides that maybe our competitors don't, or old ways of doing things don't. So it's really important to have a more well-rounded approach in that whole element of making sure that your messaging aligns with the people that you're trying to speak to. And again, I would say that goes back to know your audience for the various things that you're doing. So your pitch deck that you are presenting to potential investors is probably going to look a little bit different than the ultimate marketing video you do for end users who might just, their whole goal is, I'm aware of this product. Maybe I talk to my doctor about, is this right for me, kind of thing. So I think with the complexities and making sure that you're not oversimplifying, it's really always goes back to knowing your audience and understanding what their pain points are, speaking to those pain points in a intelligent, in a educational way, making sure that even if there's jargon, so to speak, or acronyms or things that can potentially make things feel inaccessible, that you are again saying, well, here, let me educate you on how this can go about and elevate your understanding. So don't shy away from education in a gentle and constructive way.
Beautiful. So Lindsay, on that, given that we live in a very automated world these days, we run the risk of losing authenticity in our key messages, especially with AI coming into play. But with that, we also run the risk of losing credibility and trust, which are two vital things, particularly for the MedTech industry.
Yeah.
So considering brand reputation, image management, what would be your recommendations for PR professionals to ensure that in the messages we share, we not just make sure to build credibility and compliance, but we really foster that trust and authority? Yes.
So I think that there's so much to this, right? And I think as PR professionals, marketing professionals, we know we have to get our audiences to know, like, and trust us before they buy from us. And this is just consistent advice across all industries, but it definitely applies to MedTech, and it does so even more, like you mentioned, of making sure that you are building that credibility. And so I think that a lot of it has to do with, there's so many different ways to do this, right? I think a lot of it is when you can establish yourself as a thought leader, you are going to help that process go faster. And so, when you just sort of throw a device into the market, it can be hard because people especially if you're not a well-established brand and you're maybe more of a startup coming up with this great innovation, you don't have that instant name recognition or brand recognition that perhaps some of your competitors do. So when you start out and you're trying to figure out, how do I get my message out there? How do I build that credibility? It can be really, really helpful to have this, basically this idea of building up that thought leadership. And, one of the things that I always love, I understand the startup world. I owned my own businesses in the past. And, I used to joke that I was operating on a $0 marketing budget, and it was pretty much true. And so making sure that you go from, optimizing your entire marketing strategy to success is really important. And for me, a lot of that had to do with building up thought leadership and brand authority based on, at the time, it's sort of founder-led. That's often the case, especially with startups in the medtech industry, is you are a founder-led brand, and your reputation is already probably prolific in the industry, or will help you get there. And so how do you do that? You search for avenues where you can be quoted in, podcasts. So you can be a guest on a podcast. You can contribute to an article. You can host a webinar. You can be a guest on a webinar. You can contribute, you can write a blog post. You can do all sorts of things that, while it takes time, it's often not either expensive to do or doesn't cost you a dime. And so the more that people get to understand who you are as a person, who the brand is, and what you value, what you bring to the table, that's going to build that credibility and that authority actually pretty quickly. So I think some things to think about is, as you're building your brand, you want to search out for those opportunities, right? To build your credibility. And there's lots of great resources out there to do so. I mean, for example, a couple free tools to think about are, there's this website called HARO, which is Help a Reporter Out. Stands for Help a Reporter Out. And you sign up for their newsletter, and then 3 times a day on weekdays, you get this emailed newsletter of journalists looking for sources that they can use to quote in an article, say. So maybe something that comes across your desk where it's like, journalist is seeking someone in the medtech industry who can speak to the new insulin pump technology and how that's going to change the world. Well, hey, if you're there and that's your bread and butter, that's fantastic. You go and you pitch yourself, you explain who you are, and then you have this earned media. Same with Quoted. That's another resource for, journalists to connect with these experts in the field, and you can build your credibility that way. There's also resources like podcastguests.com. That's a way to match potential podcast hosts with guests and get those opportunities to showcase who you are and what you do and your brand. So what I'm trying to get at is that you don't necessarily need a robust marketing budget in order to allow yourself to build that brand credibility. And the more that you do, it starts stacking up. It builds that trust in the industry. And then all of a sudden you reach this point where people go, oh, yeah, I heard about that company. And when they need your device, you're there, top of mind.
Beautiful, Lindsay. So you touched on thought leadership, and you also touched on people-driven branding. So thought person-led branding. I don't want to assume everybody in the audience understands what, thought leadership-led branding means. Let's say you're a new medtech company, you're just starting out, you're operating in a space with mega players. What would your key bits of advice be to new thought leaders or brands who just want to, make an impact with their thought leadership competing in this market? How do they get started?
Yes, I love that question, because I think it is something that can feel very intimidating at the beginning, especially if, I've met some engineers who are, oh my gosh, so brilliant, physicians who are so brilliant, but they might not be comfortable speaking in front of an audience, or they're not sure how to get started. And I think that's a really good thing that you're touching on. There are lots of ways to get started that might not be as intimidating. At least I hope not. So, one thing is, if you might be a little bit uncomfortable with the idea of, say, a live session. So, you get the opportunity to do a webinar or podcast, and it feels like, oof, well, even if it's recorded and there's editing capability or whatever the situation is, it might just feel like that feels like too much too soon. Okay, let's dial it back. Let's start smaller. Let's start with an interview. Let's do a written interview where you have time to think through your answers. You can write, you can edit, and then you can go back. I would say one of the resources that I would firmly recommend is Authority Magazine on medium.com is one of those resources where you can, they have a lot of interview series going at once. You can pitch yourself to be a part of one of their interview series. You submit the form, and if you're accepted, they send you a written set of questions that you have time to really think through and digest and respond to. And so it's not as intimidating, I hope, as it is, as again, something live might feel. So as you're building that authority and that comfort level with putting yourself out there and putting the brand out there, I would say, don't be just start, right? I mean, I think we all have this internal thing at the beginning where, you go, oh my gosh, is that how I sound? Or is that what I look like on film, or whatever the situation is? Many of us have that. I would say that the more that you do it, the more comfortable you get as well. But honestly, here's the thing, back to your point earlier, authenticity is everything, especially in the world of AI. Nobody really wants anymore this sort of recorded, robotic, like so extremely polished. You don't say ums and ahs. You don't maybe stumble over your answer once in a while. They want you. And the more that you and your passion and your expertise shine through, the more it resonates with your audience. And if you can just be 1,000% who you are in that moment, whether it's through a written interview, whether it's through a webinar or podcast, you showcase your heart and your passion. Storytelling is everything. It's how humans connect, right? And this is actually a really great example of this right now, is because none of this is scripted either. And so there's this moment where you have this I have such a passion for storytelling, and it's not perfect. Not all my words are perfectly structured in a sentence, but what I can show you is my heart, and what I can connect with you on is a human level of, this matters. I care about who you are as a person. I care about the product that I'm delivering to the world. I care about changing lives. And if you can do that, that's everything.
Nice. So let's say you started out with that, and now you reach a new layer in business where teams start to grow. You're becoming a little bit more established. With that comes new investors, new stakeholders, and a lot of teams where now all of a sudden our key messaging needs to stay consistent across departments, across different parties. And it's easy to get things confused, or messaging evolves, we go through change, nothing is stagnant. Do you believe in a set framework to make sure key messages stay consistent? Do you think it's more free flowing? What's your opinion on how brands and messages evolve?
Yes, well, I absolutely love this question, because I am so about brand experience. And branding to me is one of those things where I think a lot of times we have this idea as maybe marketing and PR people that, just because it's the way we're taught, that branding is about, your logo and your fonts and your colors. And you spend a lot of time thinking about those. And it's really important. You have your brand board. 1,000% correct. You want consistency across every single side of and inside my company, perceive who I am and what I do. And it's really critical to have a consistency across the board. So whether I am somebody coming in from the outside or whether I am somebody who's part of the team, we all need to understand who the company is at its core. And that needs to be something that everyone can say. So if you ask, a new team member, or you ask a new client, who are we, what we do, you at least get a fairly consistent answer, right? You want to avoid any kind of brand confusion of, well, I think that's what they do, right? And we don't want that. So I think that it's important to develop some consistent branding narratives. Things like a 30-second elevator pitch. You of course need your mission, you need your vision, you need some core values, things that define who you are and how you show up in the world. And when you get those things down and you can kind of say, okay, so for example, with the 30-second elevator pitch, it kind of goes back to my last thing. We don't want a robotic answer. We don't want people just memorizing and saying, this is what X, Y, and Z company does, blah, 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 right? Because it won't come across as authentic and passionate and like you really care about what you do. But at the same time, you don't want to go so far off script where people are like, wait a second, he said this and she said this version and the other person said this version. And so we're not quite sure what's accurate. So develop a brand narrative, like a 30-second elevator pitch that people use as a baseline and then can springboard from. That way you've got at least something where you say, maybe there are a few key words or key phrases that you say, this is very critical to who we are and what we do. So let's make sure that across all of our conversations, this is always something that we communicate. And then from there, allow freedom for interpretation, for people to say, this is why I care about this so much. This is why I'm passionate about it, as they're talking to potential investors or to clinicians or patients, right? So I do think that it is important to have something cohesive that ties everything together. And then from there, allow your people enough freedom of expression to take it and make it their own so that they are able to authentically talk about who you are and what you do.
Nice. That's some really good advice. And that brings me to my next question. The MedTech space is obviously growing. We're seeing a lot of new innovative products hit the market, but within that, there's also a lot of noise that people need to compete against, just trying to get in the spotlight. So we've spoken about thought leadership. But I'm curious to hear from you if you think there are some simple or perhaps underrated PR tactics that work surprisingly well to help companies stand out in this space.
Yes. So I think I've mentioned a couple of them before because, here's the thing. I've talked with many. Okay, so in my capacity in consulting, I do marketing and PR consulting as part of Project MedTech, and I've done that prior to this as well. And so I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of different clients and help them get their message out there. Mm-hmm. And I do think that some of the more underrated ways of doing it include these earned media opportunities. It includes it takes time. Okay, so you have a trade-off, right? You could do a lot of paid ads, which, okay, maybe they take a little bit of time to set up at the beginning, but they kind of run themselves once they go, right? And then you just sort of monitor and verify that they're working in the way that you hope they will. But so there's that, or there's take a little bit more time and develop your thought leadership. And I know that I feel like I'm going to say this a lot, but I do think it makes an incredible difference. And I see companies succeed really well who are willing to put themselves out there, talk about who they are. As a founder too, it doesn't always have to just be about your invention or your product, or your service. It can also be about who you are, who your team is, because that also builds that know, like, and trust factor. And so, you don't have to just stick with yourself, put other people forward in your leadership team, or even, just other people in your company to express who they are and where their expertise comes from and why they're passionate about what they do. So I recognize I'm gonna sound like a broken record here, but I really think that makes a huge difference in developing that thought leadership. So everything from, again, reach out to industry podcasts, find out if they have guest spots where you can talk about who you are and what you do. The worst thing that can happen is they say no, right? So it's and even then it might be no, not now, not forever for the rest of your days, right? So reach out to people, find out if they need guest spots. And the same thing goes for even interviews that you might pitch for. If there's a magazine or an industry journal or an online resource that you admire and respect, reach out to those people, see if you can contribute an article. Yes, it's going to take time, but it helps build your credibility and authority in the industry. And it's a great trade-off. Again, sign up for those, things like Quoted and Haro so that you can actually respond to queries as they come through. You kind of have to be on top of it because you're going to want to make sure that you're pitching as soon as possible because journalists are working on a tight timeline, right? But do it. And then, the thing is, worst case scenario, if everybody in the world tells you no, which they won't, but if everyone tells you no, then do it yourself. Write a blog post, put it on your website, record yourself talking about who you are, what you do, what you're passionate about. Do tiny clips, right? Do a minute at a time. You don't have to do this insane 30-minute talk. Do a minute talking about this one particular element of your device that is so unique in the industry, right? Throw it up on the web. You never know where those things will lead. And the more that you can do tiny little bits of things that build your thought leadership and credibility, all of a sudden it reaches, what you might call critical mass and becomes really exciting. So start somewhere. You can always start somewhere. We all have, I hope, I think, smartphones, and those are great. You don't really need a more robust camera than that. Just start somewhere. Share who you are, share your heart, share your device or your service. See where it takes you.
Nice. So let's say we've got the ball rolling now. We're really getting in the motion of the things. We're pursuing the thought leadership. We're putting company announcements out there. How do you know when your efforts are really working?
How do we know? I think there's probably a number of ways that you do know that your efforts are working. I think in the sense of, well, hopefully people are buying your product, right? But I think also there's a lot of different metrics out there, right? And I talk a lot about this in terms of, from a marketing perspective, we as marketers like our metrics and like our data, and we look at things like, on LinkedIn or other social profiles, depending on what you have going. You might put in, you'll take a look and you'll go, okay, what are my impressions? What are my reposts? What are my, what other data we can get at? And I think it's important to understand the difference between what I call vanity metrics, not just me, but what we call vanity metrics versus things that move the needle. The reality is, at the end of the day, how many people are reaching out to you based on the things that you're saying? How many times do you have conversations with people in the industry who go, oh, yeah, I heard the podcast that you were on. I think I know about what you do. It's the word of mouth recognition. It's the who's sharing who you are and what you do outside of your network. It's the reposts and the comments and the things that resonate. So what I'm getting at is basically there are a lot of different things to track. At the end of the day, you want to say, okay, this has moved the needle. This is moving the needle because I am seeing the right people who can either invest or buy my product or are the end user or whatnot. They are seeing who I am and what I do. And I am drawing in those leads because my messaging is resonating with them. So I know it's kind of a non-answer, but there's so much to it that I would say that, track your data, always keep, make sure that the things that you're doing are moving the needle for you in the ways that do help. But at the same time, feel free to take a step back. And sometimes as you're building your brand, it's not going to feel maybe like you're an overnight success. You're going to be putting those, you're going to be stacking one brick on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of the other to build your brand in your house, so to speak. And all of a sudden you get to a point where it's like, oh, hey, here we are.
No, that's beautiful. I think we all go through those motions of, is what I'm doing actually amounting to success? So do you have any advice then on when you look at your results, how to relate it back to your brand goals or your brand growth? Let's say you're not necessarily seeing the sales, but we have media placements out there. We're starting to make some noise. How do you advise all those working bits connect just to make it visible that we're working towards this goal?
Yeah. So again, I think this is where tracking really helps, because sometimes we have this idea of the impact we're making, and if we don't have the data to back it up, it's a little bit hard to continue to justify the time or the spend on whatever it is you're doing, especially if you are on the marketing team, or you are PR for the company, and you do need to have both the feel-good sort of metrics of somebody had the loveliest comment to say about what I put out there, but you also need to have, what's the ROI? What are the leads coming in? How is this actually working to build and grow my business? So I think this is a yes and in terms of, again, at the end of the day, you're building up all this thought leadership and credibility, but you also have to make the sale. You have to make money. So as you're evaluating what things are working and what things aren't, first of all, marketing is a very long game. A lot of times we feel like we're just gonna, honestly, I would say the biggest marketing myth or lie, honestly, is if you build it, they will come. Well, that may have worked in a fictional movie. It does not work in real life, in the sense of, you can't just build it and they will come. You have to build it. You have to talk about it again and again and again. And then you have to tweak your messaging, because what you think might resonate might not actually resonate in the way that you hoped it would. So ensuring that you've got all of this, building up of this of these data points, and then hopefully you're getting the leads coming in, you're having the conversations you need to convert from interested to buyers or investors. So I would say track things that way too. Make sure that, again, what you think your message, or how you think your messaging is aligning, is actually doing its job. Don't be afraid to tweak. Don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid to ask, did this actually talk to you in the way that I hoped it would? You're going to get great feedback. People love to share their opinions. Ask. Find out if what you're throwing out there is actually sticking, or if it's kind of floating into the void. Be open to feedback. Be open to tweaking and coming up with new plans, and know that it's a long game, and it's okay to experiment.
Yeah, and that sounds like the obvious thing to do, but with the startup realm kind of always being a bit more limited on budgets, or a bit more stricter on how they, spend their communications or PR funds, do you think there are some common mistakes companies sometimes run into with their communication planning, just because there's a lot of pressure riding on their shoulders?
Yeah, I often talk about, don't be afraid to experiment. However, in a highly regulated industry like MedTech, health tech, biotech, we do need to be very conscientious as marketers, as PR experts, to ensure that we are communicating within the bounds of what we are allowed to talk about. So for instance, if your device has a very specific FDA-approved indication and technically it could do other things, we don't talk about the other things, not because they're not valuable, but because that's not what we have approval for, right? You have to be very careful. This is also, so I would say, okay. So that's one mistake that I would say be very wary of. You need to be very diligent about how you're talking about your products to ensure that you are not going with that outside of the bounds of what you're actually approved for and the way that you're allowed to talk about it. Be very, very, very diligent. So I would say a mistake that you might run into is being a little more creative in your messaging in a way that doesn't align with what you're actually allowed to advertise for. So be careful about that. And then the second thing I would say is be mindful of, it really goes back to, so the industry is small. Be mindful of your competitors, but also your friends in the industry, in the sense that, while sometimes I have seen brands really want to be quite provocative. They want to say, well, our device does X, Y, and Z, which is so different than so-and-so's device that's, you know, outdated and blah, blah, blah. Be careful, okay? We don't want to make enemies in the industry. We don't want to alienate people. Sometimes I think when, you know, as marketers, we think if we compare, then it makes a huge difference in the way that we come across. We're like, well, we're so much better. Clearly, we're the winner, right? But the problem is that that doesn't always read very well, not only just with our competitors' product and their company, but also with the people we're trying to reach. Sometimes that more abrasive marketing approach can lead to unintended sort of bad feelings. And so I think I would be very careful about make sure that you're being correct in everything that you say, that it fits within the bounds of what your device is approved for. And then second, I would say, be kind, you know, be considerate in the industry, talk about your product, talk about how great it is, but don't step on toes to do so.
Oh, Lindsay, I think you gave us such good nuggets to think about. So I think that's where I'll wrap it up for us for today. And I just want to thank you so much for taking this time to share your industry knowledge and your tips with us. We do have an open comment section, so I would love to invite the audience as well to ask their questions. And if there are any, follow-up questions that we get, I'm also happy to forward those to you. But yes, thank you. This is a lovely session to kick off the PR Summit on.
Oh, well, thank you so very much for having me. Thank you for allowing me to share some nuggets, and I appreciate the time and the opportunity. So thank you, and absolutely happy to answer any questions that might arise.
Nice. Thank you so much, Lindsay. And I invite the audience to stay tuned for the next session.
Let's take a look at how strategic PR can elevate a MedTech BioTech brand. Following its Series A funding, 𝐆𝐫𝐨𝐮 partnered with PR Lab to elevate its MedTech presence. PR Lab's strategy secured top-tier coverage and 100 media hits, positioning 𝐆𝐫𝐨 as a leading voice in healthcare innovation. Iktos partnered with PR Lab to simplify its AI-driven drug discovery message and boost visibility. Through targeted press releases and thought leadership, PR Lab positioned Iktos as a biotech innovator. In 6 months, the campaign secured 359 publications, reaching 143 million people. Context Flow partnered with PR Lab to boost visibility in AI medical imaging. PR Lab's strategy secured 15 media placements, including a tech round feature, generating over 200,000 views and strengthening global credibility. Hypergenics partnered with PR Lab to strengthen its visibility as a leader in personalized medicine. Through targeted media outreach and thought leadership, PR Lab secured 8 major features, elevating Hypergenics' credibility and industry presence.
Yes, I'm the founder of PR Lab. I'm very excited to have you in this new episode of the MedTech PR Summit. So before I introduce the amazing speakers and the sessions that we have coming up, I would like to tell you a little bit more about PR Lab. We're one of the leading tech PR firms helping companies grow with the power of PR from all over the world. We're very specialized in biotech and medtech, and that's why we are organizing this summit. So together with me, I have Aaron and Eamon, who have both worked in PR agencies at big pharmas and at clinical stage and commercial biotechs. They've both been responsible for full range of corporate communications, product communications, advocacy relations, and investor relations activities. So they will both be speaking from the perspective of being at multiple sides of the table. Currently, Aaron leads IR and comms at a clinical biotech, and Eamon leads comms at a commercial biotech. But you guys know me already. I'd like to let the speakers introduce themselves. So I would like pass on the mic to you and let you tell the audience a bit more about yourselves.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks so much, Matthias. And thanks, Eamon, for agreeing to to do this with me. Not only have we both worked in those multiple roles, but we've actually worked together twice through our careers, one time at a PR agency and then again at a big pharma. And I think rather than giving you our resumes with every position we've held and company we've worked at, I'd rather just talk a little bit higher level about, kind of why we were excited to have this opportunity today. And I think we're both really passionate about the transformative role that strategic communications can play in biotech companies. We both speak frequently on these topics at, industry events, such as this one. We wanted to have some fun with this. I hope the session will give you a bit of a window into an inside baseball dialogue between us two biotech IR comms nerds and kind of what that dialogue looks like. And we also wanted to just share, the kind of conversations that we have regularly as colleagues with a broader audience. I think that, the network that you have, the people that you can rely on, for strategic advice. It's a really important piece of the job, particularly if you're in-house and an N of one. So we want to, be here to share those learnings. And also to participate in, building community around the way that communications can support biotech and pharmas. So let's jump right in. And Eamon, my friend, this first topic gets right to the core of what we do. It's about crafting narratives that support the multiple audiences that we serve. And we do need to craft dual narratives that satisfy high science investors, model-driven investors, industry media, as well as story-driven journalists and everyone in between. I'd also argue that beyond, that sort of core dual audience that the Corp Com IR people serve, we also need to keep many stakeholders in mind when we write corporate materials, like a press release, because a patient, an HCP, an advocate, an employee, right, all have access to those announcements, and we need to make sure it jives. So big question for you, but when you look at the core company narrative, how do you balance the considerations of all of those audiences? And Eamon, how do you also pull through the thread of complex science and clinical storytelling, which is such a key piece of our job across these dynamic stakeholders?
Loaded question. And for more context, for more context on how Erin and I know each other, she actually hired me at my first position. And if she had asked me that question during the interview process, I probably would have walked out the door. But now we speak more of the same language after building our careers, I would argue, together. So with that question, I think one of the biggest things that you need to do when you're crafting a corporate narrative is take a really big step back and ask, what's the business's or company's overall goal? And if you can't define that in a very simplistic way, then your current corporate story is not working. So I think what's really important is that you define the goal of the company, and then you define the framework of how you're going to achieve that goal. And I think it's something really simple before you start crafting messages. And people often, in my experience, start crafting messages before they can answer that simple question. So I really do think that's step one. Number two, your employees are your biggest advocate with your corporate narrative. So when you're crafting and going through this exercise, it's really important to collate a group of cross-functional colleagues to weigh in and advise. So for example, when I have done this at my current company and my past companies that I've worked for, I've made sure that there was representation from clinical, from medical, from patient advocacy, from HR, from technical operations, everyone across the company, because you want to make sure that, again, you're telling that story and it will resonate with different people who do different things, and having that representation is super important. So once you have your goal, once you have your team, then you really start going through the interview process. And what I like to do is do really intense information gathering sessions with the experts within medical and clinical to understand the science and to ask them very elementary questions. Because as Erin said, we need to take those very complicated science stories of how these drugs and medicines work in the body and explain that to the public. So we do that. And then coupled with that, we really better understand how that team that you've assembled talks about the company, right? How do you talk about the company to a patient advocate? How do you talk about the company to a physician, and really understand the language that they use to better inform how we draft the narrative? So once we have that internal research, the team assembled, and the goal defined, the next piece is to really do an audit to understand how the media and other stakeholders are talking about your company. Do they talk about the company in the way that you want them to talk about it? Is it consistent across multiple stakeholders? Is it being pulled through in news coverage? Those are important questions to ask. And then you can really find the discrepancies and see what's not breaking through, but also what is and what's resonating. So I would say really invest in the research and the time it takes to pull something together, and don't agree to build a narrative in a 3-week time frame, because that'll never happen. And what you'll end up with is messages that change quarter over quarter, as opposed to having a sound framework and narrative for the long haul. And often a lot of times I see people make mistakes of updating their narrative on a 6 or 12-month basis. That should not be the case. A narrative should be something that stands over time and is added to, not something that is habitually changed time and time again. And I think if you put in that work in the upfront and go through that process and those steps, you'll find that you don't need to do that. And what you're just updating is your proof points as you're disclosing information quarter to quarter. And that's my answer.
Even I think awesome that you literally just gave people a step-by-step guide of how to kind of facilitate that process at a company. Another thing I loved about what you said is that we can't write narratives from the outside in. We can't think about what do our audiences want to hear. Let's make our company be that. That is not an authentic narrative. Even if you think it sounds better, what we really have to do is look from the inside out. And like you said, gather those stakeholders so that you know that what you're saying, truly comes from the business and represents across the business. So
and one quick point too is when you're doing this research, a lot of companies put out their messages that sound good, right? But then they don't have a very strong proof point to back it up. And I think the proof is in the pudding, and you really need to embody this narrative, everyone from the top down, and have really authentic proof points to support how you're talking about the company. And I think you can't write that effectively until you know what those proof points are. So I think just taking the time to do that research, to your point, Erin, bringing the outside in, making sure you have very unique and a cross-functional team that can represent and speak to how they talk about the company and be that, subject matter expert for you in that particular area. So net, I think put in the work in the upfront and it'll pay off in the long run too.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I think next I wanted to actually, one thing that we wanted to touch on, Eamon, if you have any input about this, and you sort of touched on, inviting your clinical people and your scientists to the table, but how do you specifically, sort of get that complex science and, biology that's actually going on with the medicine, kind of distilled into that narrative that is more general and high level? Any comments about kind of working with your team on those, and how do you simplify?
Yeah, I think back to what I said earlier, I think take the time to do very intense interview sessions, not just on the product itself, but the disease, and understand how the mechanism of action works to supporting alleviating symptoms or curing whatever your drug may be doing in that disease, and have the set up time to ask really pointed questions that you know someone who isn't a subject matter expert would ask, i.e., an investor you're bringing on board or a journalist that you're trying to pitch this story on. I don't think any question is a stupid question when you're onboarding and truly trying to understand that, because when you do that, you can write with authority and you can also write in a way that the masses can understand, not just someone with a PhD or MD. And I think our job as communicators is to communicate the story from everyone who has their PhD or MD all the way through to your Aunt Jessie, who, you know, doesn't understand anything of what you do or what your company is working on. So I think you really have to I think you have to thread that needle. But again, I think it comes back to putting in the work and making sure that you're taking the time to truly understand that, because if you don't understand it, then how are you going to communicate about it effectively?
Yeah. And in a lot of ways, right, like the mechanism, the disease state, these are the stories, right?
Exactly. And something may come out of that conversation that you didn't know or your boss didn't know that's truly unique, that may give you a fresh angle or a different perspective to go out there and pitch the company story.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good transition actually to the next thing that we wanted to talk about, which is, you know, once you have that narrative that you're confident in, then you need to use it, you know, to address all of these dynamic audiences that we've been talking about. So, you know, how do we use that narrative? And I'll take this question, but I'm asking it to myself. But I think the question that we, you know, kind of want to address is how do we take that narrative to all of these different types of investors, the ones who might have the MD PhD background, or, you know, a more generalist investor or a model driven investor. We even have so many different audiences within IR. Not to mention, you know, a story driven journalist who wants more of like a human impact story. How do we use our narrative to do all of those different things? And I think, you know, my main piece of advice, and this is from someone who started in the communications world and has been in IR for the last, you know, 8 years or so. But just like in any communications exercise with investor relations, it's just about meeting the audience where they are. You naturally do prepare a range of materials. You need to have a range of spokespeople also. You need to have your, you know, medical and science people that can speak to the PhD, MD investors in their language. You need your CFO and your, you know, CEO to carry the story, carry the financial story as well. So you need to have different spokespeople prepared. But I think that, you know, you'll have your corporate deck that usually will satisfy an industry author, let's say like someone at Endpoints. I think they read corporate decks and that's the level of information that works for them. If you're trying to do a more human impact story, I've even had, you know, patient materials that are prepared for patients, right, for participation in a clinical trial or something like that. But you can use them to help media understand, you know, what the patients are doing in our trial, and that sort of stuff. So I think you can kind of tailor, you know, content in different ways for dynamic audiences. But one thing I want to do a little bit of myth busting about is that kind of human touch element, and, you know, do investors really care about this? And I've actually had a lot of really interesting conversations where there is a piece of the story that investors or, you know, that community might not be seeing in the way that I do. And when I get down to it, it actually is about reminding them about the patient experience that makes them realize, oh, this drug actually could be really differentiating. So let me give an example. A lot of oncology products specifically cause cytopenias. It's just part of the mechanism of action. That means it increases, you know, red blood cell counts, white blood cell counts. And when you hear this or you see a scary number, like 70% of patients in a trial experienced a cytopenia, I think you could look at that in a quantitative way and think, oh my goodness, like this drug is toxic. You can't take these drugs. However, many drugs that are approved have that toxicity profile. And it's because a cytopenia is a lab value. That's actually just a number on a blood test where your counts are elevated. You don't wake up one morning and feel cytopenic. right? If it's really severe, you're going to feel fatigue, you're going to have some of those symptoms. But if you're being monitored appropriately, they're extremely manageable. So when I was able to translate that, 70% into a story of how it actually impacts the patient, it actually really helps investors understand. And at the end of the day, they're just people also. So I do think that in certain cases, it really makes sense to remind them of the patient experience because it helps them see it could be a really nice product. Other things in terms of, investor relationship management, you have to advocate with your C-suite for them to make time for target investors. There are, handfuls of investors that can significantly move your stock, and that can also not only move it, but almost are thought leaders where if they're invested in something, others will pay attention. There's clumps of investors that, follow each other. So just understand how that works. Make sure, that you're talking with them and again, meet them where they are. What kind of investment theses do they usually do? I think another thing just to consider in the relationship management with investors is the way that you organize your conference schedules, NDRs, even financings. That can really impact, I guess I should say, your relationships with analysts, and you need to kind of understand how those, sorts of decisions support them, and just kind of be able to see things from their side also, I think is really important for relationship management. And that kind of leads me into my last point about relationship management, which is just be a good person and be an authentic person. No one likes to work with a-holes. You don't want to work with somebody who's like overselling their story or, not being truthful about what we know and don't know about the science. Just be a really reasonable person. These are career-long relationships. And as you see with Eamon and myself, for example. So, you don't want to be that person.
And I think, Erin, you bring up a good point about just in terms of relationship management, it's also about customizing the experience for the audience that you're communicating to, right? So when we're communicating results from a study or the approval of a drug or even a new business update or milestone, we really need to make sure that the news and the impact that it would have on the specific stakeholder is communicated to them right away. So in that initial communication, really thinking about, okay, what's the patient advocate's first question going to be about this? What's the investor's first question going to be about this? What's the media's first question? And so on and so forth. What's employees' first question to ask? So I think by preempting that and proactively addressing their question, whether that be in the formal press release or any supplemental communication you send, whether that be an email or a phone call you have with them, it's really important. And you can provide that white glove service without explicitly saying you are, and then you just become that source of authority and the company becomes that great relationship manager as a whole, as opposed to just the individual who's in that role as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I did want to toss it to you, Eamon, to talk a little. I just spoke a lot about sort of the investor analyst relationship sides, but you have had major media mogul moments and, some big pharma media relations roles, as well as, leading communications at some commercial biotech. So maybe you can talk, especially in today's age, right? Like media just has changed so much. Tell us a little bit about cultivating relationships, but in kind of both roles, and kind of
Yeah.
how part of your role. Yeah.
So I think when I had the opportunity to be on the global media relations team at Pfizer during the rollout of the vaccine, and what a time to do a crash course in media relations.
The COVID vaccine.
The COVID vaccine, yes, the COVID vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine, just to clarify. And, when I took this role, it was definitely outside of my comfort zone. I had never really done true media relations before. And I think like everyone that person.
You're not giving yourself enough credit, but no.
I think anyone that I'm trying to apply to the masses here, Erin, just let me speak, please. But I think the biggest thing that I think a lot of people, when they come to that role, is most scared about is, oh my God, I'm talking to a journalist. I need to be super formal. I need to proof my email about 12,000 times, because what if I say something that isn't accurate or, isn't true? And you are, in the right to be nervous and scared. You're acting as a corporate spokesperson for your company. But at the same time, media are just like any other relationship you build, whether that be with a peer, whether that be with a leader within the company, or whether that be a family member or friend, right? You put in time to get to know the person, their interests, the stories that they're going after, and really, again, make sure that you're sending them news that they actually care about and would write about and have an interesting angle for as well too. And that was a big learning for me. I think a lot of the times people just like to spam reporters, even though they're told not to, but really your job as a communicator and doing true media relations is finding nuggets within the company that would be interesting and tailoring that pitch to a specific reporter. I'm a big fan of an exclusive. I think they can do a lot of work for the company. And essentially that means that you provide one story to one reporter and one outlet, and you don't give it to anyone else. And I think you can be super strategic in how you go about doing this, whether that be the disease category you're in, whether that be the news that you're announcing. You can really make sure that you select an outlet and then also give them a reporter the white glove service that they want, and then at the same time get a very nice piece that everyone inherently picks up, right? And you don't have to do the masses work. You can do it with one, outlet and truly get what you would get out of spamming someone. So it does take a little bit more effort. It does take a little bit more time, but I think the more you do that and the more outlets you do it with, the better, relationships you'll build, and I think the better results you'll get as well too. But net managing media relationships is managing any relationship in your life. And I haven't worked at Pfizer in 4 years, and I can say all of the relationships that I built with everyone from CNN to the Wall Street Journal to the New York Times to even Fierce Biotech, I carry with me today. And I think the most precious thing that you have to remember is that those relationships are everything, right? And they're transferable across the companies that you work at. So definitely put the work in, but also hold those relationships close. Don't let anyone, outside of you or your trusted partners, speak to them too, right? And make sure that when they are, and you do put that trust in others, that they're doing it in a way that best represents the company and best represents you as well.
If I could add to that, I mean, one thing that you said that really struck a chord was like, not every story needs to be a press release and not right. And I do think sometimes in PR we have these targets that we need to hit, and we're just really trying to create story that is just not interesting, or we get pushed to kind of share a press release about a feature or something that is just not relevant. But at the same time, I noticed that a lot of PR departments kind of not make much use of, they don't leverage, let's say, newsjacking or data reports or other tactics that could create even better stories. It's just sharing press releases about new features or I don't know, a new person in the team that maybe people don't care about. So I think it's also important in this case to also explore other tactics and not just stick so
yeah, and I think that's a great point. Communicators nowadays have a lot of tools in their toolbox, right? Not everything needs to be the traditional press release. I think at a biotech company, just because you are smaller, because you're building, your investor base and consensus as well, and you don't have the same threshold that a big pharma company has in terms of materiality, you definitely lean more towards the traditional vehicle of press release. But I think as the company grows and, you grow too, and you go to larger firms, there are different vehicles that you can use, social media, or to your point, pitching a news story that maybe didn't warrant a public disclosure, but is a sexy story that people would be interested in knowing, and using that vehicle as well. We did that a lot during the COVID-19 pandemic and rollout, and everything from, talking about the vaccine to talking about, COVID-19 itself. and the importance of vaccination too, which disease awareness doesn't always warrant a press release, but I think these other vehicles can be a very good solution to bring that awareness to life with the company as the spokesperson for that.
Yeah, so that actually gets us into our next topic, which is sort of about news flow, strategic timing of announcements, some things we can control, like when our earnings are within the SEC window, or other types of announcements where we might have some flexibility, and then some things just happen to us, like FDA approval timing, and things like that. So I think, and then we also know that we have this narrative, which we've established, which we really want to be able to track our milestones to that narrative. As Eamon said, as business progresses, we should be able to accumulate proof points with these milestone achievements that map to our business, right? So I think, Eamon, you kind of mentioned this topic, which is sort of the first question at a biotech that we always ask when we're planning our news flow, which is this material? And I think that's just the absolute first thing that you need to know, because we need to know, is this timing flexible or not? If it's material, you have 4 days to make that disclosure. So you do have 4 days of flexibility that you can use as you see fit. But you pretty much have to do that announcement. And it's not just, is this material, but what piece of it is material, right? Did a timeline move? Did the financial situation change? We really need to know what's at the core, because that's really what the announcement is. Yes, we do tend to press release more in biotech for that transparency, because our materiality threshold is much lower when you have 1 or 2 products in development. However, you can also utilize the 8K and things like this. So like you said, Eamon, there's always tools that you can use to achieve different objectives. If the only objective is disclose something material, maybe an 8K is appropriate. If there's like a substantial business update associated with it, you're not going to want people to just guess based on the 8K what's going on. You're going to want to put a narrative to it in a press release. So I think, above all, our commitment is be compliant, understand SEC requirements, protect our company, make sure we're following the law. Obviously legal is an important consultant in that, but I do see that as our responsibility to help shepherd that as good communications. I think one thing we were asked to talk about is, kind of FDA interactions and how do you plan to announce these. This is just all about the scenario planning. I'll usually have like 6 plans of what could happen, based on an FDA milestone if it's determined that that event is material, and you're just going to have to, throw 5 of them out when you see what actually happens. So I think there it's just a lot of prep work, because those things do move fast. FDA can put news out themselves, and you just want to make sure you are fully scenario planned for those types of things. And then Eamon also mentioned, other tools we have, like social media. I really like to use this to sort of show, not tell the story. So if you're in clinical development, what you need to be doing is, enrolling your trial. You can show stories of your clinical operations team, hard at work, traveling to trial sites, initiating sites, things like that. And I do think for all audiences, right, investors are on LinkedIn, et cetera. I think it's nice for them to see that momentum, right? Like the executives are telling me in a hotel room at a conference that their team is executing, and I'm seeing photos of them executing on LinkedIn. Like that's a nice kind of connection to have. So that's a little bit about how I think about news flow, particularly kind of as relates to supporting the narrative, and kind of looking at, what you have control over and what you don't, as you scenario plan. But then there's always the good crisis communication that just throws everything off. So Eamon, maybe you could just talk a little bit about, you're going swimmingly along, and then, some kind of crisis comes up, maybe like a pandemic or something like that. And how do you, how are you prepare for that, and then B, handle it when it happens?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And I think, everyone hears the word crisis communications and gets nervous, I think, but I think it's our job as communicators to keep that steady hand in the room and help control the situation, but internally make sure that we have the right people around the table to address, the issue in question and in hand, and then also make sure that we have an ongoing crisis communications plan in place that is really agnostic to any issue that you're dealing with, but has a very sound process in place of, if X were to happen, then this team is brought in to discuss, to determine the communication vehicle, and to determine the message that we put out there from the company. And those are three questions that, I've asked in any crisis communication that I've worked on over my career, and they're really transferable whether you work at a 10-person company or whether you work at a 80,000 person company. I think those three simple questions are what you should ask yourself in that situation in the room, and making sure that you have a plan in place that everyone agrees to, so you're, again, as prepared as you can be when some of these ad hoc topics come up that you need to respond to in a timely and robust manner and way. And again, these things are very simple that we're talking about. It's not rocket science. And I think one of the things, it's not rocket science, a lot of the learnings that we're sharing, but people can get bogged down in the day-to-day. And especially when you're working at a biotech company, when you're N of one and you're doing everything from updating text on a website to issuing social media posts to being a strategic advisor to your C-suite, I think the biggest thing across the board is just being prepared and making sure that you're going into every meeting or every situation with the objective of, okay, what do I want to get out of this? And and if you do that in any type of situation and any type of thing you're doing, then I think you'll be very, very successful in your role too.
It's so true, Eamon. Such a core part of being successful is just being able to manage the C-suite. Like, we play such an important support role to them. And yeah, I don't think you can be successful in this role without having their trust and respect, that you can navigate through these
And
things.
I think that's a really important point, Erin. And we've both, started new jobs where we've had to get to, build trust rather quickly. And I think a lot of times, people make the mistake of coming in and trying to boil the ocean. And I think don't think that it's not worth it, as I mentioned at the upfront, to do your own research. You can do your own research before you get to the company, but really take the time as a communicator when you're starting a new role to meet everyone across the company, to listen and to learn for those 30 or 60 days, and then go to your C-suite with a recommendation of, here's what I'm focused on, the three things I'm focused on the first 6 months. And then this is what I'm going to be focused on the next 6 months, and be very focused and very strategic and show how those priorities relate to business goals. And I think that's the blueprint for success. And that's the blueprint of how you set up communications as a strategic advisor in the room and not someone that's executing tactics. And again, I think people think that comms needs to be pizzazzy. You need to do everything under the sun. But no, as a communicator, you need to prioritize and you need to simplify in how we tell the story and how we execute how we're going to tell the story. One of the biggest learnings for me when I transferred from even in agency side to big pharma, from big pharma to biotech, is the importance of internal communications. And I think I didn't truly appreciate when I was on the agency side how important internal communications is. And because it's not something that a lot of communicators farm out to their agency partners, right? They're more focused on the external work. And since you know the company and the DNA of the company a lot better, you really take on that role. But even the difference between how we communicated at a big pharma versus the importance of internal communications at a biotech company, especially when everyone's focused on pivotal milestones that the company has put out there. How do you really navigate internal communications, as an N of one, and knowing how important it is to get the story right externally? How do you balance to make sure that you're getting the internal story right as well? And do you have any tips on how you go about that in terms of crafting your disclosures and the supplemental communications that follow?
Yeah, excellent question, obviously. And yeah, it is funny to think about the kind of big pharma internal comms role to, N of one, you're doing everything, including internal comms. And a few things. I think, first of all, as you build that narrative, I think there is space for the internal part of the story to come through a little bit. Sometimes your people are going to be your differentiator if you're in like a really tight race with another pharma or biotech to develop a certain class of drug, and stuff like that. So I think when you build that narrative, like we were talking about from the inside out, the unique kind of pieces of your culture and what makes your company differentiated, and how can our people uniquely support, these business objectives, behind whatever product it is that you're developing. So in some ways, I try to make sure that like the colleagues can see themselves even in that external narrative, and that's kind of woven in, as part of your corporate narrative. In terms of actually executing internal comms as an N of one, it's really challenging, right? Like, I don't think either of us is going to sit here and say that that's a really easy thing to do. I think that, just like you were saying, taking the time to get to know your team, who are the leaders that like really want to have a voice, that want to build culture. How can you partner with HR on all of the culture objectives so that you can really align internal comms to them? I actually am at a company that didn't have corporate values, and that's something that we need to roll out, which is actually an external and internal tool.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Your corporate values are public. So I think there are things like that where you can strategically focus on objectives that hit internal, external, and that unfortunately you just have to make that extra time, even if you're drafting, your executives' internal comms at like 8 p.m., to just make sure that you keep that drumbeat, because especially in like an execution phase, which is what so much of what our companies do are, like you need to have that culture link all the way through.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we talked about before and you referenced is just customizing that external announcement to internal, right? Just don't just copy the press release and put it as your executives' internal communication. Really weave in there what are the top questions or things that people want to know about, inside the company related to an announcement, right? And don't assume, right? I think you brought up a good point earlier that everyone knows everything that you're announcing within the company, right? Like you may be announcing a very complicated regulatory update or scientific update, and not everyone that works in the company may understand that. So make sure that you're writing in a way that people understand, and keeping in mind that just because you have the same email address to someone, not everyone has the same level of, expertise as well.
So I think don't underestimate the power of just sending that internal comm a few minutes at least, and maybe even a few hours before you put out that press release. I think people really do want to know what's going on at their company before the rest of everyone knows. And I've had very few legal issues with that. You can trust people to have that information for like 2 hours before market closes or something like that. So I think just that's an important piece to advocate for, the cadence, right? Making sure that internal comm comes before, that people feel like it was tailored, for them. And then I also think, to your point, don't just copy the press release. A few things I always try to think about when drafting an internal comm is, how does this relate to our corporate objectives? If we can position that news in terms of, we've achieved a corporate goal, or that
Yeah,
we're on
excellent
track
point.
for it.
Yeah.
And then I also always look at it in terms of values, like what values did the company, how did we exercise our values in achieving this milestone, and kind of calling attention to those two things.
That's a great roadmap, and hopefully people can follow that when they are writing that internal communication at 8 p.m. that you referenced earlier. I think one of the also biggest things, and what's become a buzzword a lot for us as communicators, is this concept of thought leadership, right? And like everyone in a leadership role needs their own presence on LinkedIn and needs their own like speaker bureau program. And I think, that's nice when you have, the infrastructure and the resourcing that you have at a larger company. But I think when you're working for a smaller company, a startup or a biotech, whatever the area that you may be in, I think thought leadership becomes a little bit different. And it's not about the individual, and it's about the company. And it should always be that way. But sometimes we think we get to a place where we're customizing thought leadership platforms in a way that sort of lifts up the individual and doesn't simultaneously uplift the company. And I think you see that a lot nowadays too. It should be really that individual is driving the purpose of the company, and really they're just the vehicle to communicate that mission of the company and what they're about. So with that, Aaron, you support an executive team, a large one, as an N of one. You have a CEO. How do you navigate the asks of a thought leadership program, and also how do you educate on what's actually needed at this point in your company's phase, and what's the longer term goal of that as well too?
Yeah, it's funny, Eamon, right? Like you get some of the executives who are like, I need a LinkedIn, like I need to speak here. And that just think they need to be doing these things, but don't really know why. So I think again, it's always about meeting your audience where they are. If you're in that boat, sort of exploring, well, why do you think you need a LinkedIn? Like, what are you trying to achieve? And how does this tie in to the actual business objectives of communications for this company? Because that's what I'm here to do, right? So I think that's kind of one route that can happen. Then you have your other folks who maybe don't like the public speaking part, right? Maybe that's not the part of the job that they love, be it in any C-suite position, and they'd rather not be doing that stuff. And then I think that's kind of a conversation with them about, where are we as a company? Why do you need to be doing this? And here's a way that we can ease into it and get comfortable, right? And I think like part of being able to have those conversations is what we've been talking about, of really earning the trust of the C-suite, that they can kind of be open with you about those topics. So yeah, I think that's kind of how I would approach thought leadership. And I do think, it's not, it can be used as a buzzword, but when done right, it really does drive business. So I think that's what we have to, really keep our sights on.
I think it's a really awesome tool in terms of flipping the question back on them of like, why do you think you need to be there? And like having them explain that to you, and then say, all right, well, you're already doing that here, and this is a much more effective use of your time and energy because we're meeting X, right? So really try to understand, I think, where they're coming from too, and then advise how they're already doing that. Maybe it might not seem as big and flashy as, what maybe their peers are doing at larger companies, but it's still an effective way, and a way to do quote unquote thought leadership for the company and for their brand as well. So Aaron, throughout my career, you've been, you know, the wise one who's sort of guided me from, being a college grad at 22 through now, leading corp comms at a biotech company. And, I've really admired you as, you know, a communicator and how you approach conversations with executives. So with all of the words and wisdom that you've provided me over my career, both personally and professionally, um, what are some words of wisdom to, you know, the biotech communicators currently in the role, but also those that may want to, you know, take communications on as a career path for them as well?
Wow. All right. So words of wisdom for current biotech communicators.
And remember, this is recorded, so you can't, you know, give me the harsh feedback that you give our listeners the harsh feedback that you normally
Well,
give
I
me.
don't feel the same way toward them as I do toward you, so they won't get that. But no, all kidding aside, yeah, I think just really pragmatic knowledge from me anyway. I don't know if that's wisdom or not, but I think first of all, again, just approach these relationships with open minds. Remember that everyone that you're going to deal with, from the investor to the CEO, um, to the journalists, we're all just people, right? And I think that especially working in healthcare, which is such a human driven industry, just be a real person. I think sometimes we can, you know, get caught up in corporate speak and we want to seem so professional. And I'm someone that's always looked way younger than I actually am myself, right? So you kind of think maybe I need to act in a particular way. But the only way that I've had success in this role is just really trying to bring that authenticity and kind of my best intentions to the role, because you have to do that when you're part of a healthcare company and really embracing, you know, the humanity of what we do. So I think, you know, again, that's kind of basic common sense to me, but I just see so many people not doing that, and I don't really understand why. And then I think also another just really pragmatic thing, you just need to be a good writer and a good oral communicator. And if those are not your basic skill set, there's so many other amazing jobs that you can have in, you know, biotech, if that's what you're interested in, or, you know, other industries. But there's just no substitute for that, even with AI and all these things. That really is the core skill set. You know, not every PhD, like you said, can write effective communications for our audiences, right? So that's kind of at the core of what we do. So maybe I'll leave it at those two.
No, that's so true. And I think for me, if I were to offer some words of wisdom to kind of piggybacking off of what you said, is we're all people. And I think I was just giving a tutorial to a bunch of different people in our R&D group who were preparing for an on-site to give TED Talk presentations on 6 different topics. And what I said was that we're all storytellers, right? And I think a lot of times we get bogged down in the facts and setting up the context and, you know, trying to sound sometimes smarter and more polished, when at the end of the day, we're just telling a story, whether that be the story about the company, whether that be the story about how and why this medicine is needed to get approved, right? And I think when you boil it down to that, I think that, to your point, you need to have, you know, good written and verbal communication skills. But taking it a step further, you also need to be able, with those skills, to simplify and to tell a simple story that everyone can understand. So my biggest advice as you're maybe approaching a next step in your career or deciding whether to get into comms, just when you are in that role and telling a story, just ask yourself, who is the audience I'm communicating to? What is the objective of said communication, and what do I want to communicate? And if you can answer those 3 questions, then you have something to say and something to talk about. If you can't, then go back to the drawing board. And I think it's taken me a little bit of time, you know, over the course of my career to really say that with confidence and use that mechanism every time I draft something. And I think just keep that in mind as you're approaching anything, whether that be a new job, whether that be a new role, whether that be entering the workforce, you're a storyteller, and having those three guiding principles to tell said story, whatever that may be, will make you extremely successful.
I love that.
Always three steps for an amen.
Yeah, I love things in threes.
I love that. I love that. But that's such a good, I mean, I love that advice, and I'm definitely gonna take it with me, because it sounds simple, you know, but it's also nice because it applies to so much. I'm being wary of the time because we're running out of time, but before we wrap up, I would like to ask you both one last question, because we are recording this in October 2025. The end of year is coming. We are approaching 2026. So like, if we look into the new year, do you have any any trends, any predictions that you would like to share with the audience, things to kind of like be aware of, or I don't know, any final tips that you would like to share with the audience watching this?
I can go first and then toss it to Eamon. So I always am just an eternal optimist. It just helps me get through life and work. But I am actually very excited by some of the funding that we've seen in the biotech sector lately. Even, an IPO, and some almost mega rounds, it seems like. So I feel really excited that there's money being poured into the sector, especially at this time when I think, a lot of us expect money to be taken out for tax purposes and things by investors as the year wraps up here. So that makes me feel excited. I've seen so many more communications jobs come online recently. That makes me feel really excited that, the biotech industry is heating up and that people are really understanding, the importance of that comms role as they're building their companies. So I'll project that optimism. Eamon and I haven't said the buzzword AI one time in this whole presentations or discussion, I guess. So, I am.
I was gonna say that in my answer, but
Oh, well, okay.
just saying.
Well, Eamon can speak to his piece of it. I will say that I have definitely started to use some of the AI tools, specialized for investor relations and things like that. I find them to be helpful and additive. They do not replace anything that I do, but they can make some of it faster, spitting out a draft, things like that. But you got to be really careful because they don't know as much about your business as you do, and ultimately you have to take final accountability. So I don't see our jobs being replaced anytime soon. But Eamon, what were you gonna say about our last?
No, I think my perspective on AI, and the more I read about it, is we should embrace what it can do and the time that it can save us. But I can say with all confidence, it won't replace what a strategic communicator brings to the table. And if your C-suite or your boss thinks it can replace you, then you're not doing the industry or role service, because you are acting as a taskmaster and as someone that drafts materials and puts out tactics, not being the strategic advisor in the room that advises on how we communicate, when we communicate, and what are the channels that we communicate on that are most appropriate. So if you're nervous about your job as a communicator, or you're nervous about the replacement of AI, make sure that you're positioning yourself and the function as strategic and not as someone that pushes out tactics. And I think how you get there is following the advice that Aaron and I have shared on this conversation, to not toot our own horn, but also seek out the advice of others within the field. Reach out on LinkedIn. If you're struggling to get a seat at the table, ask someone who is in that role how they got a seat at the table, or how they make themselves invaluable to the company. There's so many ways for us to connect as a communicators network. Just do that. But I really do think that AI can only enable what we do and be another set of hands for drafting materials, but they can't replace the brain power and the strategic nature of our job unless we let it.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. I really enjoyed this chat. I mean, it was very insightful. Before we finish, how can people get in touch with you?
I'm always available and responding to inquiries on LinkedIn, so please feel free to connect with me there. As Aaron mentioned, we both go to a lot of the industry events, so always happy to grab a coffee or a lunch or a drink, an adult beverage, if you would like at those conferences. But when Aaron asked me to do this, and when you get to that point in your career where you're sharing advice, I think we just want for me personally, I just want to see everyone succeed, and I want to see our function grow, and I want to see where communicators can go and make sure that we always have a seat at the table. So always happy and willing to provide advice and counsel wherever I can be helpful.
Same for me. LinkedIn is the best place to find me. My name is spelled weird, so you'll definitely find me there. And I think I just echo everything Eamon says. These events are so important to me because we do have such an important role in these biotech pharma companies. I also want to see the communications function really escalated to that strategic support and guidance, as opposed to some kind of tactician. And so we're really here to be mentors and advocates for people that feel the same way.
Amazing.
I'm gonna steal that word, tactician, Aaron. I like it. Did you just remember that? Just teasing.
Well, yeah,
Well, thank you,
both.
Matthias, and thank you for continuing the education and inviting us to speak today. It's been a pleasure, and thank you for all you're doing to educate and provide resourcing to our industry. It's super helpful and so valuable as well.
Yeah, but got you guys. Thanks so much for making the time. It's been a pleasure, and I think I'm speaking on behalf of everyone watching this that it was very insightful. So I really appreciate you both making the time and preparing this talk for us. Thank you.
Let's take a look at how strategic PR can elevate a MedTech biotech brand. Following its Series A funding, 𝐆𝐫𝐨𝐮 partnered with PR Lab to elevate its MedTech presence. PR Lab's strategy secured top-tier coverage and 100 media hits, positioning 𝐆𝐫𝐨 as a leading voice in healthcare innovation. Iktos partnered with PR Lab to simplify its AI-driven drug discovery message and boost visibility. Through targeted press releases and thought leadership, PR Lab positioned Iktos as a biotech innovator. In 6 months, the campaign secured 359 publications, reaching 143 million people. Context Flow partnered with PR Lab to boost visibility in AI medical imaging. PR Lab's strategy secured 15 media placements, including a tech round feature, generating over 200,000 views and strengthening global credibility. 𝐁𝐈RGenics partnered with PR Lab to strengthen its visibility as a leader in personalized medicine. Through targeted media outreach and thought leadership, PR Lab secured 8 major features, elevating 𝐁𝐈RGenics' credibility and industry presence.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the final session of the MedTech PR Summit by PR Lab. I am Alma, and it's been such a great day of insight and conversation so far. Huge thanks to Jacqueline and Matthias for leading those earlier sessions. So to close things out, we're shifting focus to one of the most essential pieces of the PR puzzle, your relationship with the journalist. I am joined by someone who really knows that space, Joe Dara. So Joe's worked with over 40 publications, many focused on healthcare, medtech, technology, and more. And he's here to share what actually works in a PR pitch, what turns the journalist off, and how to build lasting, meaningful media relationships in a medtech. So let's get into it. So Joe, from your experience, what are the key elements that make a PR pitch stand out versus one that just gets deleted right away?
Sure. Well, first, I think it is worth delineating between a general pitch or a press release and a targeted pitch that is specifically meant for a particular publication or media professional. If you're going to make the effort and therefore the appearance that you're making a targeted pitch whereby someone is receiving a message addressed directly to them by name, that pitch better be tailored to what is truly germane to that publication. Especially if you as a PR rep or organization aspire to land in a particular publication for whatever reason that might be. And I think the only way to truly accomplish that is to be familiar with the publication before you send out the pitch, to the point that you have an understanding of the tone of how content is written for that publication, as well as what are the relevant topics that tend to be covered by that particular publication and what readers are really looking for, or at least what those who run the publication believe the readers are looking for. So if you're sending a templated pitch to various editors or journalists where everything is the same except for the salutation, the greeting, I don't know how successful that approach will be for pitches in general. I look at it almost like the approach on how HR executives want employment candidates to treat cover letters and resumes. You should find some unique approach to every pitch that you send to a particular publication. Now, I know that invokes a potential for time management issues, right? But that feels like a whole separate conversation. Now, to that end, if we're talking about a generalized pitch or a press release that's meant to be inviting for as many folks as possible, I'm a big believer in supplying the basic tenets of journalism and reporting in that pitch, in that press release. Who, what, where, when, and why. This is what journalists need, right? Just to set a baseline. So while the why, the quote unquote why, can certainly be subjective, I think that's basically the point in this situation. By generalizing that type of info, you put it in the hands of the publication to reach out. And odds are that at that point, the connection will be worthwhile if there is a reach out, if you are contacted by the pub in response to a generalized release. Additionally, and somewhat related, if you want to strengthen your chances of receiving engagement from a pitch, you should, of course, list a contact email and phone number. Yes, a phone number, even if you let every call go to voicemail. For general information purposes, be sure that your website or social media platform contains a contact us page that lists the appropriate specific contacts for the media by name and email and phone number. Don't just provide a generic contact form on your website. And this is, this is somewhat in addition to pitches, but just felt it was worth mentioning. Ideally, your organization will also have an online newsroom for instances in which journalists perhaps follow your pitch or a social media platform, whatever your dominant spaces that you use online, that provides media relations contacts, whether that be simply from the person who sent the original pitch or just a team of media contacts that can be connected with. When considering how to gain publication without receiving apply from someone, meaning, okay, you're sending out a pitch, you're sending out information, and you don't even necessarily need to be contacted directly from a media professional or a publication. You just want to get your news out there through making your own one-way, essentially, connection to a media professional. You want to try to accommodate those who also might not have the time to reach out to you as well. Maybe they're just too busy to provide a reach out or a reply back, and just want to use the information in hand for their purposes. I think from that context, you want to be able to, for the journalist, the media professional, when they go to a contact page or an about us page on your site, to give an actual description about your organization. If I'm planning to use content that I received that is helpful, or if I find content on your site that I believe is helpful in following up from a pitch, I need to know exactly what your organization is. What's your mission? What do you do? I don't necessarily need a long narrative about how your organization formed or why you're important. That information is helpful to a certain extent, of course, but it is not a replacement for, we are company X, and this is specifically what we do and where we are located. It's fascinating to me, and maybe even a little bit annoying, that there are so many organizations that don't have this simple, basic information readily available, either at the bottom of any pitch that they send, or certainly on their website or within their social media platforms, whatever, again, their dominant use of the internet is to position themselves. So I know that this information has gone beyond just the pitch, but I hope that it is still meaningful and relevant for for purposes of helping PR professionals to gain something out of their pitch and out of their online presence that journalists might find their way to from a pitch.
But yeah, well, thank you very much, Joe, for this. It was so insightful, and it was a great reminder, especially the part about the phone numbers, because us PR people, we're kind of putting all our energy and efforts into emails and social media messages, maybe, and we kind of are forgetting the power of a phone call, which I believe now in the AI era that might be like a lot more valuable than maybe an email written by AI, because that's more authentic. And yeah, well, thank you very much for all these great insights. Well, let's jump into the second question. Well, yeah, PR professionals, PR teams, grab your pens and notebooks, because this one is a very good one for us. So Joe, what are the most common mistakes you see PR people or PR teams make when pitching MedTech or healthcare stories, and how can they avoid them?
Well, I don't know if they're mistakes per se, or if it's just suggestions that I have for different approaches, to what you're trying to accomplish here. I think it's basically what I would try to avoid is coming off as the appearance that you are cutting and pasting someone's name onto a template message and then sending it out. That makes me think that the content is either not important or not important enough to do more with it than just stow it away until I possibly get desperate and need it. Okay. And that's only going to be helpful overall for the organization if the media professional is organized enough to archive it, right? If something's sitting around in my inbox on a given day, tomorrow it's going to be buried, and the next day it's going to be buried times 2, right? So if the pitch doesn't make an immediate impact on the journalist, it's just going to get stuck in an inbox. You have to make that impact. And again, that doesn't even begin to consider if that journalist is then going to be organized enough to archive it for future need, right? We would hope so, but there's no guarantee on that. I'd also caution folks who resend the same message repeatedly, whether that's through an automatic mailer or not, to just be careful on how many times you resend. I think the common cliche that I see is, hi Joe, or just maybe not even mentioning me by name at all, but I want to get back to the top of your inbox, right? Okay. If you want to send a reminder 1 week later, fine, probably actually a good idea. If you send a reminder 2 days later, I think you risk being flagged for spam or potentially being unsubscribed from if you're somehow contacting somebody who has either knowingly or unknowingly subscribed to a listserv that journalist appears on. Also, I'd advise against the use of AI to write your pitches. I know that might sound like a fantasy today, but if your goal is to make the most meaningful of media placements for your organization, I think human-to-human contact is the way to go, human-to-human communication. Assuming that you're reaching out to humans, right? If your goal is to connect with humans, why use machines to do that is kind of my general thought process. Now, that doesn't begin to, and I don't want to pretend to know, the business, the time management, the staffing numbers, that go behind the work that any organization does. But just from a general baseline, trying to make a meaningful connection, human communicating to human, I think is you should be doing.
Well, yeah, definitely. But yeah, since you mentioned AI, I would just like to make a connection with the artificial intelligence, and yeah, jump into the next question we have prepared for today. So, Joe, with AI tools becoming more common for research and also writing, as you already mentioned, how can PR professionals keep their pitch authentic to journalists?
Yeah, well, it seems like it's challenging and simple all at the same time, right? I think it's everything that we've been talking about to this point so far. Let's look at that first adjective that appears in the question here: authentic, authenticity. What does it mean? It means real, right? Now, to a certain extent, I think people can take the word authentic and expand on the definition, and have the definition vary somewhat. But really inherently, it means that it's real. And how else can you be authentic unless you, as the human, are writing the pitches? I don't know. I don't know that you can be authentic without the human writing the pitches. Now, I don't know how reasonable it is today to expect organizations to not use AI at all for this purpose. And when I say that, I say it not because it would be unreasonable to expect people to not use AI, but just with the frequency at which AI is used today for so many different tasks, that's kind of what makes you somewhat think, in my mind, okay, how reasonable how reasonably can I expect AI to not be used either in part or totally for the writing of a pitch? From what I've heard, people are using AI today to write personal emails to their own existing clients. If that isn't the opposite of good customer service, I don't know what is. For those who are going to insist on using AI with their pitches, with their content, I'd suggest limiting it as much as possible. Using AI for research, for fact check, I feel like that's generally okay. Again, assuming that you are vetting your sources that are being shared and that those sources are legitimate. Not to get too much in the weeds here, but spell check can essentially be considered an example of AI today. You want to use spell check before you send something out? Okay, probably a good idea. But if you're using AI to send out what you are posing as an original pitch, I don't think you should be expecting a wealth of return, or at least a wealth of meaningful return. I think PR reps need to ask themselves, what would they expect if a publication was producing content about their organizations, about their sources, by having AI write the articles? Would they want that? Would they expect better press if a human wrote the content, if a human produced the content? When you reach out to media with AI pitches, are you expecting to reach a human? Or I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense to say, I expect to reach a human with my non-human coordinated pitch. If you expect to reach a human, it should be a human doing the reach out for the most effective relationship, in my opinion.
I agree with everything that you said. Well, yeah, of course it is like that, whether you use or not use AI, but I think it's how you use AI, because, knowing how to use AI, it's, I think, an art on itself. So yeah, Joe, I think we're all navigating that balance right now. But I think it's very important to know how to use AI rather than if you use or not AI, because it's actually a part of us already. Okay, the next question. So MedTech stories can get really technical. What are your best tips for helping PR reps make complex topics clear? So without oversimplifying them.
Yeah, I think this comes down to just knowing the content that you're writing about, knowing the content that you're pitching about, knowing the content that you're reaching out to a media professional about. And you can't fake it. You either understand a subject matter or you don't. I look at this almost internally in the way that I look at from a sales perspective. Like if a sales reps who are selling a brand, trying to sell a brand to advertisers, whether it be a magazine, a website, what have you, you need your salespeople to understand your publication in order to effectively sell to advertisers and attract the most appropriate advertisers. I think it's the same here. It doesn't mean you have to be an expert when you're making a pitch or when you're reaching out to a media professional. As a journalist, I'm not really an expert in everything that I cover. Perhaps I'm not an expert in anything that I cover, but I'm informed, right? I'm informed through communication, and I'm informed through research. And I feel like PR reps, PR professionals should take that same approach. So if you're a PR professional who is unsure about the industry or the arena that you're tasked with finding meaningful collaboration within, I think you have to engage in as much research as possible, attend trade shows, sit in on conferences, maybe even pick up the phone and conduct your own interviews for information gathering and for insight. Find some ways to get the baseline knowledge to prepare yourself to understand what it is that you're writing about, that you're pitching about, and what it is that you're trying to entice media professionals to cover for you, for your organization, for your sources. I think that's the best way collectively to keep your pitches that you send out from the most informed place possible. Also, I suggest attempting to personalize your pitches by tailoring the content to the media professional and the outlet specifically, by pitching something that makes sense based on recent coverage or just any insights that you can glean from reviewing publications or viewing websites and so forth. Perhaps suggest a particular pitch for a particular content section of a website, right? So I'm receiving a pitch. Hey, Joe, this content would go specifically well in, let's just say, your website's spotlight section, your website's new product section. Make a pitch that specifically suggests that the content lends itself to a specific section of a website or a publication, or what have you in that regard. Maybe it's even reaching out to somebody to suggest that a particular media personality who covers particular beats, that this pitch is specifically meant for them if you can't reach that person in particular. But just show some kind of personalization in your pitch. And I think personalization is actually a two-way street. Productive pitches or content that is authored by an expert source that can essentially serve as an interview from which quotes can be derived. And what I mean there is personalize the pitch in the sense that a pitch is coming from a voice that can therefore be used for the content for the media professional. Also, attempt to personalize the pitch by tailoring your content to the media professional specifically and the outlet, by pitching something that makes sense based on their recent coverage or traditional coverage. For example, perhaps suggest a particular pitch for a particular content section of a website or for a particular department in a magazine or any other kind of publication, to just make the pitch more meaningful and to help that media professional silo where they can target the content. And personalization, I think, can be a two-way street. I think a productive way to send out pitches would be by sending content directly from a source, a knowledgeable source, there, in which case the media professional can use the content of that pitch for direct quotes from a informed source on a particular topic. It's almost the same concept as a reporter participating in a reporter's pool or attending a press conference, but you're sending it directly to the person. Similarly, consider inviting media professionals to any online or in-person Q&A type sessions that allow for questions to be asked on a currently trending topic. If you don't want to call it a press conference, call it something else, but essentially pitching a media professional to be able to attend or participate in a Q&A session with an informed source about a trending topic could be a way to make the connection.
Great insights, Joe. So as in my understanding, it's all about meeting the audience where they are, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
Perfect. You gave us a lot of insights about pitching and what we do, what we should do good, what we do bad, and all of that. So beyond just the pitch, what can PR teams do to build stronger long-term relationship with the journalist?
Yeah, great question. Very important. Be reachable, especially from the perspective of going beyond the pitch. Okay, you've sent me a pitch. Can I reach you? Whether if it's not directly for this pitch, which hopefully it would be, but did you make a good enough pitch that makes me think, oh wow, I should go back to this person or should go back to this organization for other content needs that I have? Be reachable. Be reachable through email, be reachable through phone, even if you're inclined to let your phone go to voicemail. Have a personalized voicemail that lets the person know that they've reached the right person. And I don't think anybody is put off by leaving a voicemail today if they have to. In fact, it might even be more inviting. Might be more inviting for the journalist making the call, thinking like, okay, it's probably going to go to voicemail. I'll leave a quick message letting them know who I am, what I'm looking for. I'm responding to this particular pitch. Please call me back so that we can discuss it. I actually got a lot of things going on right now anyway, right? So when considering how to gain publication without receiving apply from someone, right, just sending your pitch out and having it picked up and utilized in some way, I think this comes back to some static presence on your company's website or social media, with an About Us page that gives an actual description of your organization and actual real contact information that in which you can reach media professionals. Now, this again, feel like I might be sounding like a dinosaur, but any contact information that you provide, make sure that there's a phone number included, so if the person is inclined to reach out that way, that they can communicate in that way. I also think it can be helpful to, and again, everyone's busy today. Technology just inherently makes us more busy, and that's fine. But I don't think it's a bad idea for just relationship building, setting the baseline for a relationship, making an introduction, a lasting presence. Send an email that introduces yourself as a PR professional, introduces your organization, even if it's a well-known organization that you think the journalist, the media professional already knows or should know. Just be an introductory and inviting the journalist or media professional, whoever they are, if they'd like to participate in a 10 to 15 minute call or video meeting that would, virtual meeting that would give the journalist the opportunity to express what are they looking for in the short term and the long term, right? Let the, find a way to let the journalist specifically tell you what their needs are. This can be perhaps just simply an introductory email that invites the journalist to reply back. Another method would be just asking, providing the journalist with a blank canvas to say, reply back to me when you get the chance with content that you're looking for, sources you're trying to connect with, what's trending, what are you covering right now. Just give the journalist an opportunity to write back 10 or 110 sentences about what they're looking for and how you might be able to create a mutual beneficial relationship. As a journalist, I make frequent use out of such services as Arrow, Help a Reporter Out, and Quoted, QWOTED. These are great places to go and find sources about any type of topic that you're covering in a variety of means, print, online, podcast, multimedia, video. So this is a place that PR pros can create a presence, and it's a great way to have pitches at the ready whenever you see a journalist send out a query for a content topic that they're covering. So I would suggest signing up for these types of services, and if and when you do, and you send a pitch to a journalist through those means, just make sure that you're willing to maintain the communication, and that it might happen outside your regular email inbox. I know we have a lot of logins and passwords today, but I find that these types of services are very influential, not just for acquiring sources in the moment for particular topics, but building long-lasting beneficial relationships with PR pros.
Well, this was super helpful and very insightful. I am 100% sure that it will be very helpful for our next pitch, and the chances to land will most likely be higher. The one last question, Joe, before closing this session. So looking ahead in 2026, what trends or shifts in healthcare and MedTech journalism should PR professionals be paying attention to?
Yeah, as a matter of practice, I think the biggest challenge that journalists and any media professionals face today is how do we stop the spread of misinformation? Now, in a vacuum, I don't think any of us individually can really prevent someone out there from not appropriately sourcing their content or not conducting research or using AI to write content, and therefore stopping the widespread dissemination of misinformation. Aside from standing over someone's shoulder and telling them, no, don't do that, right? What can we do? Well, I think individually, the best that we can do is to ensure that the work we produce and the work that we're producing in collaboration with others is truly authentic, as we talked about earlier, right? And so we as journalists really, especially today, rely on the authenticity of PR professionals in this regard, right? It's important for PR professionals to be authentic in order for the journalists to be authentic, right? It has to work hand in hand. Now, as a matter of content, I think preventative medicine, wearables, and yes, the integration of AI is what interests people most, right? We just spent a lot of time talking about how to be very careful or even not inclusive of AI in your reach out to media, but AI is being integrated everywhere out in the world, and it's compelling. It's compelling content for in the instances of the right reasons, right? So, but we need the humans, the experts, to explain to us as journalists the concepts to us in which AI is being utilized out in the world, right? So don't use AI for your pitches necessarily, but be prepared to help explain to journalists how AI is being integrated out in the world that we're covering. So I think aside from that, being multimedia savvy is very important. The more successful I think you'll be as a PR pro, making a long-standing relationship with a journalist, I think it opens up a bit of a slippery slope as far as objectivity goes. But I think organizations should consider collaborating in ways to produce multimedia content with journalists. For instance, I've worked for many publishers who would gladly accept recorded interviews from key opinion leaders or subject matter experts sent to us from an organization that is good, good effective audio, good video that we could use on our site. You have to make sure that you're balancing objectivity in there, and that something isn't content isn't influenced by advertising, one way or the other. But I think connecting with journalists and media professionals in a way in which you're producing multimedia content is definitely a great way to build a meaningful relationship moving forward.
That's really valuable to think about, especially now that we are heading into the next year. Joe, thank you very much for sharing your time and insights with us. This has been such a practical and honest look into what makes great PR work in MedTech and healthcare. And so everyone who's joined us today, thank you for being part of the MedTech PR Summit by PR Lab. We hope you're leaving with new ideas, fresh perspectives, and a better understanding of how to make your PR strategies more powerful and more human. So that's a wrap on the summit, and thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Of the MedTech PR Online Summit. Thank you for joining us and being part of this experience. We hope the content we've shared has given you valuable insights and actionable strategies to take your MedTech company to the next level. Every MedTech company is unique, and to help you apply these strategies to your specific case, PR Lab offers one-on-one consultations. In these sessions, we analyze your needs, challenges, and opportunities to craft a PR approach that truly drives your brand forward. If you're ready to take the next step, Book a free consultation with our team. Let's explore how we can help your MedTech company gain visibility and stand out in the market. We look forward to seeing you soon.